My name is Paul Bogush, and I'm an 8th grade social studies teacher at Moran Middle School in Wallingford, Connecticut. My classes have been involved in the archive project for the last 2 years. This wasn't just about saving websites. This was about preserving a piece of America's history. And I know this might not be up there with preserving the Declaration of Independence, but to those students that are involved in the project, it is just as important. It's one thing to hear about it from your teacher, but from a person representing the Library of Congress, that really makes it real. For the first 2 meetings, I was always getting the question, should I save this website? Should I save this website? And I said, I'm not the one, I can't decide. I can't, if it's a website that you go to on a day-to-day basis and it represents a little part of you, then that is what you would save. Who picks is a great question, and if I can convert it to who has the power, who makes the decisions, who has the responsibility for what goes on in the classroom. I think the kids really rise to the occasion and when they have responsibility, when they have power, when they have choice, and they're the ones making decisions. I think what they kind of found through this archive project is that, in a sense, they became historians. They were the ones who were deciding what sort of history from their age will be preserved. And it kind of gave them a unique outlook on what they did, what they do on the web. It made them really consider, what does this represent? This site that I'm preserving, how does this represent me? How does it represent the time that I live in? What's the bigger picture that someone looking at the site 200 years from now would get about our generation, the town I live in, the state, the bigger picture. Once they got involved, they really started to approach the primary sources that we use in class a little bit differently. They realized that someday in the future, whoever looks at these sources were picked by them. And each one of them brings a bias to what is going to be picked. And I think one of the things they benefit from in looking at the primary sources in class is that they now realize that with every source that they use, there's a bias with that source. And there's a perspective that somebody had in either preserving it or in the writing of it. It's no longer can they just take a primary source and just take it at face value. They have to think a little bit more critically about, who was the person that preserved this? What was their bias? What was their passion? What was their love? What did they hate? And how did those things come together to create this primary source? One of the things that the students found challenging is believing that what they did on the internet was actually important to someone in the future. I think in the beginning there was a real attitude of, why would anybody want to know that I was looking at this site? Why would anyone want to know that I was interested in this topic? And it took a couple of conversations to make them realize that it is important to know about what this generation represents. They start looking at what they're doing in their life and what kind of record they're leaving behind. I don't think they've ever really thought before about how this generation will leave hardly any hard objects behind. Being a part of this archive project really gave them a sense of they have to do something to preserve who they are. And the you is not them as an individual, but them as a group, them as a generation.